All right, everyone, welcome back to Introduction to Insect Taxonomy. Today we're moving on after the Chelicerata to the Mandibulata. So last time in part 4 we talked about the chelicerates. Today is part 5, we're talking about the mandibulates, and specifically we're going to talk about the myriapods. So we're down here. Let me get a dark color. So today we're done with the chelicerates. We're going this way. So if you will remember, the difference between the mandibulates and the chelicerates is, well, there's a lot of differences, but why they're named the way they are is that the Chelicerata, the Chelicerata have chelicerae, like in the spiders, they have these fangs, which move up and down, and the Mandibulata, the crustaceans, the insects, and the myriapods have mandibles that move side to side. So, in the Chelicerata, this is the picture that we showed that we looked at last time. We have the chelicerae here. They're not always fang-like. Sometimes they are pincer-like, but in spiders they are fang-like. And they're the ones that people are most familiar with. They have their mouth parts are fangs, which they inject digestive enzymes, and then they can suck out the juices from their prey. But in like insects and myriapods and crustaceans, they have mandibles. So these are the mandibles. They overlap in this. This is a tiger beetle or a ground beetle, and they overlap a little bit. This is a predatory species, which is why they are so large and why they overlap so much. And they scissor backwards and forwards in order to tear at their prey for chewing purposes. So they have a number of mouth parts which they can use to chew, either for chewing plant matter or for chewing animal matter. In this species, it's carnivorous, so they will tear and scythe at their prey and then move that food into their mouths, which are farther back in the head. So for the myriapods, so we're moving into the myriapods. These are the centipedes and the millipedes. So for the myriapods, we have 4 groups that are not super well understood of their evolutionary relationship. We know that there are 4 major groups and then a bunch of extinct groups, but we have the millipedes are the diplopods, and the Myriapoda is usually just called the parapods. They're a very, very small group, not too many species. The chelepods are the centipedes. And the symphyla are the garden centipedes. These are, again, a very, very small group. And they're also very, very small. So the garden centipedes and the parapods tend to be fairly microscopic. They're not like these giant, Vietnamese centipedes, highly venomous, launch themselves at relatively large prey. They can eat like rodents and stuff. And they're not giant like the African millipedes that are, eat apples and stuff like that. Although most millipedes and centipedes are small, the parapods and the symphyla tend to be really, really small. So the evolutionary relationship between these aren't super well understood. This is one possible proposed evolutionary diagram where the chelepods and the symphyla are related, or more closely related than the diplopods and the parapods, but we're not entirely sure. There are other diagnostic trees that you have multiple outgroups and then a really closely related set of groups. But there'll have to be more studies done on this, but it's not super important for what we're talking about today. Today we're just going to be talking about what these things kind of look like and how to recognize them, although you probably are already fairly familiar with the diplopods and the chelepods, but with these smaller groups, we do need to go over those. Overall, the myriapods are a fairly small group evolutionarily, number of species, compared to the insects, which is what we're going to be getting into. But then again, everything's small compared to the insects because there's so many frickin' insects. There's an estimated about like 13,000 species of myriapods, mostly in the diplopods and the chelepods. The parapods and the symphyla, you're talking about a couple hundred species in each of these groups, and then the chelepods and the diplopods represent several thousand species. So first we're going to look at the diplopods. So how do you recognize... Actually, let's go back a little bit. How would you define a myriapod. So they are metameric, just like the insects and the crustaceans and things. And if you will remember, or if you sat through we talked about this last time, but if you sat through the early morphology series, we talk about this as well. Metameres are repeating body segments that are mirrored. So generally a metamere is a body segment with a pair of legs that come off of it, one on each side. They will have a ventral ganglion in the bottom, so this is like a nerve cord connecting the segments. The top, and on the dorsal aspect, the top, they'll have a heart, usually, and then they have a large gut that runs through the middle of the segments. And this metamere repeats over and over and over again. Insects have this as well. Insects and crabs and things like that all have this, but with insects and crustaceans and things, this metamerization is usually very, very specialized, so that you have the formation of like the thorax, the abdomen, and the head. With the myriapods, they are metameric, and they have a head, and then they just have tons and tons of these repeating metameres that go on for many, many segments, and they each have, a leg coming off of it, which is why they're thought, the old name centipede is 100 legs and millipedes is 1,000 legs, because they have so many legs. So what else do we know about the myriapods? So they also, things that they generally have in common. So on their head segment, they will have a simple eye. They don't have these large compound eyes like insects do. They just have a very simple eye, and sometimes they don't have any eyes. They do have a pair of antennae, unlike the spiders and the chelicerates, which don't have antennae. Sometimes they're straight, sometimes they're geniculate, which means that they're kind of elbowed. They have mandibles, like we talked about, and then they have a varying number of legs. So additionally, they go through a process of not metamorphosis, but a process called anamorphosis. So anamorphosis, if I can spell, morphosis. So in metamorphosis, which is what insects, many of the insects go through, or they all go through some level of metamorphosis, but it's either hetero or holo metabolous. In anamorphosis, instead of something like where you go to egg, to larva, to pupa, to adult, instead what you do is you kind of have a general body shape, and you tack on more and more segments as you go through molts. And in some species of the myriapods, they will have the full body, and they'll tack on extra pairs of legs as they go through the molts. There's a number of types of anamorphosis that we're not going to really go through, but it's basically, are you adding a segment after every molt? Are you only growing up to a certain size and then stopping? Or maybe you're only adding on certain pairs of legs and then stopping. But it's not metamorphosis, it's anamorphosis, and all the myriapods go through this. So let's start with the millipedes. These are the diplopods. Can you see that? Yeah, that's a good. So the diplopods are defined by a couple different things. They have the simple eye. They have these geniculate antennae. They are majority herbivorous or detritivores, so they'll either eat plant matter or decaying matter. Many of them excrete cyanide as a defense mechanism. So, like with these large African millipedes, if you're handling them and they get started, they can kind of sweat out cyanide, and it will blister your skin. But the easiest thing to recognize them with is they have all these segments, and they have 2 pairs of legs per segment. So a segment, if we're pretending that it's rectangular, will have double legs on each side. So they have twice as many legs as a centipede would of the same size. So, which is why it's millipedes, they have 1,000 legs, although they don't actually have 1,000 legs. So they're fairly easy to recognize just by looking at the number of legs that they have. These double leg segments. They can also defensively curl up into small balls. These large species can't, but they will tightly coil themselves, kind of like a snake. Other ones can tightly whirl themselves up. So that is the millipedes. We're not going to spend too much time on these today, because if you you'll get a good feel for them, and there's just not that many of them. Insects require a lot more talking about, but these, I'm not an expert on these, and there's just no point in talking about these in depth unless you're extremely interested in them, which I am not. The sister group to these are the pauropods, which are very, very small. They kind of look like mealybugs, but they're very, very small. Pauropods generally don't know eyes. They have very few legs. I believe it's just like 9 legs in general. Um, Very, very few legs. And they tend to be very, very small. They have no heart. They're very, very simple. They tend to live in soil environments and things like that. You have probably never seen these, but they are a small outgroup, just a couple hundred species. But really not worth talking about in great detail, but you should know that they exist. The next set of, if we go to the other branch of the myriapods, we have the centipedes and the garden centipedes. The centipedes are a much larger group than like the pauropods. They are generally carnivorous. Carnivores. They will hunt their prey. They generally have kind of straight antennae. They only have 1 pair of legs per segment, as you can kind of see on this. So unlike the millipedes, you have just 1 set of legs per segment. They are all venomous. They have venom, which is how they hunt their prey. Generally simple eyes. And what's interesting about them is that they don't have fangs like spiders. They have these things called forcipules, kind of like forceps, like pincers. And these aren't their mandibles. These are their front legs. So let me go to white. Yeah, it's this black and white image, and it's not great. Why is it doing that? That's weird. So they have these enormous front legs. This is the first pair of legs. Oh, that is not part of the head. So first pair of appendages that aren't part of the head, and they are hollow, and they are capable of injecting venom. And this is how they hunt their prey. They spring out. They frequently ambush predators, and they will spring out and then scythe these front legs, these forcipules, into their prey and inject them with either lethal or paralyzing venom, and then consume them. So pretty cool, really terrifying. I used to have to take care of a bunch of large Vietnamese centipedes as part of my duties in one of my jobs. And they would attack the glass as you approached. They're very vicious, and they would get very, very large. And then finally, you have the symphyla, which are the garden centipedes. These are itty bitty, microscopic. You might see these in your garden. They are sometimes in very large numbers. They can be pests of things like pineapples and in like tropical areas. But they're very, very small. Kind of look like centipedes. They even have like these ending appendages, which is common in centipedes. These butt appendages. But very, very small group, only like 200 specimens, and they tend to be 200 species, and they tend to be very, very small. And that's it. That's all that there is as far, you could spend a lifetime going into all the myriapods, but that is all there is in general in the myriapods. Next time, we will go to the biggest group out of all the arthropods, the pancrustacea. So this is all the insects, all of the entonaths, which you probably don't know about, and all of the crustaceans. And together, this is 10 million plus species. So it's an enormous amount of stuff to go through, and the insects are where we're going to spend the rest of our time generally in this course. But we will briefly touch on the crustaceans because it's such a large group, and a little bit about the entonaths. Okay, and I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.